We're moving from that time where we got our illusion of security from money to a time when we get our security from a relationship with the land and a relationship with tribe. There's the imperative that, hey, this is smart. This is a safe way to live. This could give me more security.
Inflation in the U.S. will climb between 6 and 9% by year's end, said Steve Hanke, who served on Ronald Reagan's Council of Economic Advisors. Said the rapid growth in money supply, work fueling asset prices. But the negative side to this, the rise in inflation in 2021 has been caused 100% by growth of the money supply. When inflation spikes, commodities like gold, silver, lumber, real estate have historically surged. Learn how simple it is to add physical gold and silver to your portfolio ahead of the rise in inflation and predicted price rises. Patriot Gold Group has a no-fee-for-life IRA where your IRA or 401k can be in physical gold and silver, and you may be eligible for the no-fee-for-life IRA. Call 1-800-356-4470 and get a free investor guide today.
And the knowledge that Patriot Gold Group is Consumer Affairs' top-rated gold IRA dealer 5 years in a row from 2016 until present. Click the link in the description box below for more information. And now on with the video.
Good afternoon, everyone. Glad you're joining us today. I have with me Dan Schultz. You will remember Dan from about 3 years ago when I was still living overseas. We had the most intense conversation at that time about the onset and the intensification of the grand solar minimum, the cycles, but at the same time, the solutions that were sort of on the distant horizon of things that we would need to do in our lives or manifest in our lives or create in our lives. Fast forward a few years, seems like just minutes ago, and here we are again with this conversation about solutions and things we can do with all the problems that are happening across the planet that a lot of is out of our own control of our hands unless we unite as a species to stop certain agendas moving forward. But that's, a very large scope to consider. But what can you do around what you can touch with your hands, your neighbors, your communities, things that are close at hand for you to create your own solutions inside the chaos? And a lot of people are talking about the problem, and that's great because you have to understand the problem first to then create the solution. So that's what we wanted to do today. So you can get your fill of negative news. Just go on any news outlet, and there's a bucket full of miles deep of that. Today, we wanted to sort of talk about the base layer of what the problem is, and then how we can come up with a solution. So we wanted to keep it on a very positive note. So by the end of our conversation, you walk away knowing that you have the power of your own fate in your hands, at least of what you can touch around you, and the ideas of empowerment of your friends, your families, and others to create something larger than just yourself around the periphery. Gardening is one easy thing, but I mean, there's so many others that we're going to talk about today. And times are definitely shifting. It's not as if we were 3 years ago waiting for something to happen. It's in play at the moment. So it's quite a bit different conversation than a few years back of it's going to happen. You could do this. You might think about that compared to, all right, it's in play. Now we must start to do these things to be able to give a larger safety net around us. Like for me, I'm growing my own garden. I got an orchard out here. I have my land really far out in the countryside, East Tennessee. And the closest big town is 3,000 people. So this is the kind of place I want to be, further away from society in terms of largeness and infrastructure and cities, etc., where well water, mini hydro coming off the streams here, food supplies, I got ample game, and the gardens. So I feel pretty well taken care of that. If something happens, I would have several months of being able to figure it out because I prepared in advance versus being in a city, stuck in an apartment, something happens and you have 3 days worth of food and they're doing sweeps up and down through the buildings. That's a huge different thing. So how do we get ready and how do we prepare? Dan, I'm glad you're joining me because I know you're full of ideas. When I got your email, he's like, we got to talk about solutions. And I'm so happy we're talking about solutions versus just rehashing the same old problems that are here. Floor is yours. Thanks for joining.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, everybody feels what's going on. Everybody is unsettled. What's happening is really unprecedented in certain ways, from the censorship, this, you have focused on cycles for as long as I've been listening to you. And I have always been a believer in history repeating itself, in these cycles of human cycles to galactic cycles. And you'd mentioned earlier when we were talking privately that there's this war cycle. I'm really not into astrology, David, but there's a cycle of Uranus when it transits Taurus every 84 years. 84 years ago, we had World War II. 84 years before that, we had the Civil War. And 84 years before that, we had the Revolutionary War. We have a war cycle coming up. And when you look at these, the grand solar minimum or the 12,000 year catastrophe cycle, this waning of our magnetosphere, it's all a really big deal. And so we have a situation, and I won't belabor the problems that we face. Really more important is, you have these people by the millions, by the tens of millions leaving cities right now. It's not like you and I have esoteric knowledge. People are exiting the system. And I've been talking about this, well, for years, about exiting the system. And the main reason I started talking about it is that people are dissatisfied with the system. 20, 30 years ago, we talked about how unsustainable our economic system is. We have an economic system based on infinite growth. What could go wrong there? It's an economic system based on parabolic sovereign debt, a fiat currency. What could go wrong? It's designed to fail. And then, we have an unsustainable agricultural system that depletes soils all across the board. And what I used to say is, do you know what unsustainable means? It means it's going to end. That's what it means. It's going to end. And so having some vision in your life and the foresight, which most people can see, when you talked about collapse, even though Jared Diamond wrote an excellent book called Collapse, and people started catching on, when you talked about it 10 years ago, people kind of looked at you funny and went, oh yeah, 50 years, probably will. Now collapse is on the tips of everybody's tongue. You don't need a great imagination. In fact, you might argue, and many people are, that this is collapse. What we're seeing is collapse. So, what do you do? Do you move to Tennessee? Do you move up into the mountains? Do you go off grid?
I've had a few recollections in the last couple of weeks. I don't know, bolts from the blue, if you will, that have just set my mind a little more at ease about the transition of what we're entering and the cycles we're going through. Humanity has always been going through these cycles. Humanity always will go through these cycles. They're going to go through these transitions. A lot of them are fostered and put forth by elite to drive or move a society into the next set of control structures. One thing that's changing for sure is the sun. the electromagnetic frequency of the sun's changing. Now, if you want to get down to the basic science of it, the electromagnetic field is then changing the magnetosphere, and there's changes in our magnetic fields on the earth, or things are becoming much weaker, defense of particles, and inbound ejected from the sun has a much greater effect. But again, that affects us as the human being also with our resonance field in the brain. So as the sun steps down, there's going to be an electrofrequency change. And the frequency change also needs to be matched in control structure here from the elite. So one thing that is just the easiest thing to pick out of an entire hayfield is the control down, the top down pyramidal structure that we have with central banking at the top, and then the militaries and all these different control systems within, from corporations, religions, etc., that keep everybody in their strata. That's going to need to change because the frequency from the sun is changing. So an old heavy frequency, a modular control like that of iron is not going to fit into a vibrating faster ethereal, let's say air, for an example. These are all parts of the changes that I continue to see with cycles on top of cycles. Like this control structure has been here for what? 8,000 years at least of the same players in the same positions of powers continue to control humanity moving through these changes and causing the changes in many ways, shapes, or forms. You know, Dan, you talked about the war cycle there for a second. That is so true. And if you trace that back, you keep going back through, and then there are overlaps in these grand solar minimums.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what was the recollection for me was that everything has been ongoing for more than 12,000 years, for millions of years, how humanity has come through these changes that are always ongoing. And the message for me was so stark and so clear was, do the best you can right now to weather the changes, because that's all you really can do. The best you can do right now, and not living in fear, living your days, living the moments, living a life, because it's always in transition. And that really was kind of a powerful thought that came to me. You know, you mentioned running to the hills. Well, you could do that if you really love the outdoor lifestyle. You really love the pioneering lifestyle of going out and cutting wood, make sure you got cords and cords and cords of wood to heat your house with a fire, and, you know, campfires here. And, you know, that if that's your style and you love it, invigorate yourself with it, dive into it 100%. And that's the thing, dive into it 100%, because that's all you can do is live your life at 100% of your potential and your passion right now through the changes. Because if you're going to be stuck out on the fear side of everything, waiting for the next thing, I got to respond to the stimulus. That's what's programmed, is you responding to the stimulus versus you just going 100% in on the way of life you want to live. And then the stimulus doesn't really affect you. The same way in the beginning of the program here, I'm sitting out at the middle of or not in the middle, but at the edge of a national forest in the middle of farm country in really remote East Tennessee. Things don't affect out here. Like I hear all these news and I watch the news because I do a lot of research for my videos, but I don't see it anywhere, shape, or form, anywhere remotely close out here. Even driving 25 miles in any direction, I see nothing happening.
Yeah.
So the little bubble I'm in, I'm living my passion out here. Everybody needs to do that.
Yeah, you know, you mentioned living in fear. You know, when we talk about whether it's the war cycle or the grand solar minimum, this historical fascism that is descending, I actually don't think of it as, oh, doom and gloom. Oh, look how bad things are getting. It's just a situation that we need to intelligently manage. So, you know, just like when I talk to people who had a corporate job, they had a cubicle and they worked in tech, or they worked in a factory and they hated their work. You know, that's a situation to manage. You can change all that. Now we have a situation where we're not even talking about future food shortages. Food shortages are happening now. You know, the United Nations said to expect famines of biblical proportions. We have a situation where there's a systematic takedown of our food system. So All right, don't no need to cry or whine. What do you do about that? Having your own garden is a good place to start. Plopping like you did, plop some orchard trees down. Of course, the best time to plant an orchard, the old saying goes, 20 years ago.
Yeah, so true. So true. I put
Yeah.
these dwarf species out here and we tried to really inoculate the soil using all types of different medium from mycorrhiza to kelp and an enormous amount of other inputs into each hole to try to boost the root growth and then get these dwarf species to start fruiting out in the second or third year. We got some tiny fruits this year, but I cut everything off so it would go into root development. But you're right. I wish I would have planted this thing 5-10 years ago. 5 years ago. I wish I would have bought this land 30 years ago and had a massive working farm that produced for the community, because those that produce food are going to be the new banks of the era. Food is going to be the new valuable commodity and the new tradable economic medium of exchange. If you have food, they say money doesn't grow on trees. Okay, well, maybe it grows out of the ground now because food is going to be worth money, or the opposite.
You betcha. Yeah. 13 years ago, I started my Siskiyou Mountain village, and we have 130 fruit and nut trees. About half of them are mature, and about half of them are coming into like 5-6 years old. So while I didn't plant them 20 years ago, we have an abundance. And what I saw happening and what I responded to was not only the design system failure, but I think there are two reasons to do what we are doing. There's the imperative that, hey, this is smart. This is a safe way to live. This could give me more security. I think we're transitioning from a time when we used to get if you had $1 million, you felt secure. Of course, I remind people that it's the illusion of security that you have if you have $1 million. It really is an illusion, but we feel secure if we have $1 million or $5 million. We're moving from that time where we got our illusion of security from money to a time when we get our security from a relationship with the land and a relationship with tribe. So, I just have come to the conclusion, David, that, and most of this comes from, I lived with a couple of indigenous peoples for a while. And what I gleaned from that is that we are genetically hardwired. I don't think there's anything you can do about it. There's nothing you can do. We are all a little insecure. We don't know where our food comes from, literally. We don't have that deep relationship with the land that the indigenous peoples have. They have a sense of contentedness and wholeness that I honestly think that you and I and most people can't understand. I don't think we can deeply grok their sense of wholeness that they have by this relationship with tribe, everyone around them. They have it would be like asking a fish about water. They would say, what water? They trust all of those people. And from birth, they're surrounded by these people that have their backs. They have a sense of security that most Americans, the vast majority of us, just simply don't understand. And so I think part of the answer to go from this corporate cubicle or whatever job you don't like, or seeing the unsustainable world, is embracing those two principles. So, and when you involve yourself in permaculture, this answer, this sustainable agriculture, this relationship with the land that nurtures you and you nurture it, when you start doing it, one of the first things you realize quickly is that it's not meant for one person to do. It is not. There's a reason why the kibbutz and the commune and the tribe and communities, there's a reason why the Amish all live together. is that first and foremost, it's efficient. It's just plain old efficient.
That's true. You know, even with two people trying to just do the daily chores and get the garden, even to go pick the food that you're going to prepare for your meal.
Yes.
And trim out enough leaves so there's more airflow. Like example, the tomatoes, it rained for the last 5 days, and you know the bottom leaves were getting a little mucky down there. So to go in and trim out, 40 tomato plants and get the airflow going again, plus get the tomatoes, plus get the lettuce, wash everything up, get it, prepare it. That takes a couple hours.
Yeah, yeah.
And you got to think about what we don't have as a skill set, which is taught to many, people that are in tune with the land, is the wild foraging. Because if you dropped a city person out here, they would miss a lot of the foods that I've been learning how to do wild foraging here in the Southeast. Now, for me, I'm trying to turn it into that forest equals food, and I know where to look for the food, and I'm starting to identify a lot of low-hanging fruit, no pun intended, of just easy things to identify that you always know: the plantains, the muscadines, the leaves that you can eat off certain types of trees in the year, the different weeds that are edibles, the things, grasses that are edibles with the seed, the cattails. I mean, this gamut of stuff you could walk by as long as you have a clean water source. Like where's all spring-fed ponds out here. To get that wild foraging mentality as well, in addition to what you're growing or where you can accrue at the supermarkets while they're still functional. And I might want to add one thing here. Get what you can while the supply chains are still running, because I just did a video yesterday on Union Pacific Railroad is going to suspend all traffic from the West Coast eastbound for 7 days. Now, this agri system we have, they've had such a terrible year so far for the droughts and then the flooding and off season and shrunken growth seasons and freezes late. They're going to need a lot of potash to put in right about now to get any kind of yield coming out of the fields. Well, you need rail delivery for that, because potash you sell by the ton. So to delay even deliveries of simple inputs into this mega agri business that we need, like potash at this time of the year, that's going to delay the crop yields, or even diminish crop yields by a week delay of getting potash out to the farmers. So like you say, it seems that's a purposeful thing. And I'm really wondering, Union Pacific states that it's lack of rail cars, like they're having a rail car shortage, labor shortage. Okay, where's all that going to? Because my thing is, you had enough rail cars to sustain our life all the way up until last year. Massive collapse in usage across the economies of the world, but there still should be the same number of rail cars laying around pre-pandemic, pre-collapse time. Now, where'd all the rail cars go to?
Yeah.
Or are they being packed and then put underground for continuity of government? And they need those same laborers that know how to run the rail cars and move the rail cars, just in a different place right now. So there's a shortage out here in the real world, but the continuity world over there is getting all the resources diverted for 7 days, like millions of tons of cargo, plus all the laborers to really know how to move those cars and get the cargo off the cars and then put them in the right place. Labor shortage and rail car shortage means that whole system is being diverted elsewhere outside of our visual spectrum.
I touching on something you just said about foraging and the food. I watched a movie. What was that? The Road. Do you remember The Road?
I do remember. That was really, after I watched that movie, I had weeks of thoughts after watching that. Weeks of thought had come back to me. Like, would it really be like that? Yeah. What if you do find one of those bunkers that's all full of toothpaste, candles, and yummy foods? You know what I mean? Like,
well, what was wrong with that is, him and his son were wandering the road, and they were going through candy vending machine and Coke machines, and is that there's so much forage. I mean, I live in the rainforest, so we have mega abundant mushrooms. The natives in this area, the Tolowa and the Yurok, got most of their calories from acorns. Are a tremendous source of food. We have 160 acres in our place, and we have literally thousands and thousands of tan oaks. And between mushrooms and tan oaks and huckleberries and all of the other things that are available, they're wandering around, and they preface the movie The Road with the animals are all gone and there's food systems, but there is food all around us. And it's so valuable to understand plantain and dandelion and all of the things that are just readily available. And I agree with you. Yeah, I've been saying for years that everything is on sale, and it's still on sale, even though we've had inflation. Everything is on sale right now, largely because it won't be available. The systems are breaking down, whether it's the rail cars. There's a change short. I talked to somebody at the bank the other day, and I said, really, I needed some quarters. No quarters. And I looked at the gal, and she looked back at me and she goes, yeah, it's all staged. And I said, really? You work here at the bank, you think that, huh? She goes, oh, it can't be. How can all of a sudden, she goes, I know too much about this. This system is not going to, we've lived, you and I know you lived in Asia for a while where it's a bit different, but most people in America, we've just lived these cushy lives. We go to a grocery store and there's a mountain of food, just a mountain. And we can choose, today I feel like we've been spoiled. We have been pampered. We've lived this decadent abundance, this little tiny blip in history where people could retire on a golf course. This has never happened in history unless you were a king. We've lived this little tiny microcosm, and it's ending. So you're going to see that in the fact that farmers are having a hard time getting tractor parts. There's a domino that's falling. Chain shortage in this digital currency. There's a domino that's falling. These dominoes that are falling are huge. They're 6-ton monoliths. There's nothing to stop them. And just like the fascism, there are cycles. And you look at history, whether you're reading Orwell or Huxley, in history, this does not end well. We need to be prepared for the changes that are happening.
I'd talked about having governments prep out and start to think about moving different crop species further south, about 600 miles further south, based on past cycles. So in the last 150 years, our climate's been incredibly stable, where we've figured out these grow zones in the plant and the harvest times based on a stable climate system that had existed for, several generations, 5-6 generations or longer. But that's coming to an end now, where you're starting to see, as the sun steps down, these jet streams are going to move into different places, and the cloud cells are bunching on each other. And we're getting these massive rainout events, which I'd said were going to happen because you can't have cloud cells bunching on each other and cosmic rays creating new cloud layers, and you're not going to get an enormous amount of rainfall. You're going to get biblical amounts of rainfall. And it's just what they talked about. And it's really about reading a history book.
Yeah.
Because if you look, you can find a lot of almanacs going back, say, 1800 years or so, of weather event almanacs, and it could be a monastery had written something down, the crown something, an entry of a crown agent or whatnot that had described a weather event for an insurance loss for something. And how many navies there have been from the Dutch Navy and going around, good records for the last 600 years. But then the records kept getting better from, say, 1400 coming to present day.
Yeah.
And you can just start to map out, okay, massive rains here, massive rains there, overlapping on when these cycles occur. And one thing that did keep occurring was these massive amounts of rain and massive hailstones. So you can just guarantee that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And just some other things that are going to happen is governments are going to be, changed because they can't provide for their citizens anymore. And it seems that the governments now are taking the citizens by the horns instead of letting the other way. Usually it's the other way around. Government can't provide for the citizens because of lack of food, so the citizens require change in government. Well, this time it seems like government's grabbing the citizens first, so they can't have a chance to go that direction over food, where everything's getting clamped down, locked down. Everybody's being corralled through a chute to completely control their access to food. And if you notice, since 9/11, this whole mechanism that's out there is just waking everyday state, from cameras to militarization to police. Everything's on top, so that assets have been placed in advance this time to stop the citizenry, all 8 billion. asking for change. And then on top of that, you
Yes.
start putting all these things that change the mind of the person into not community organization, but individual fracturing and, dark energies and these thoughts that are not positively resonating in people. And it seems that it's the reverse this time of what's happening because of the
You betcha.
technology.
Yeah. It's a controlled demolition. They've gotten smarter. They know, the people at the top have all the information that you and I have. They know
Way more.
about they probably got AI programs and so much more detail. They know how this is going to collapse. And, whether it's the food system, whether it's the depleting of the soils, the financial system, whether it is this war cycle, they know, and anybody can do this. Anybody can open up the history books. You look at the 1600s, from 1645 to 1715. You can look at some of the ancient Chinese records. You did a great job of documenting the fall of Chinese dynasties during these climatic cycles.